I'm sure people will join as and when, so we may as well get going. So I'm delighted that you're able to join us. This is the 10th in the series of the Tri-Biosphere series of webinars. And this series is aimed at celebrating the 50th anniversary of the UNESCO Man in Biosphere Programme. And I'm joined by the Biosphere coordinators from the Isle of Man in Joe Overty and from the Kerry Biosphere in Eleanor Turner. And I know, Joe, you want to talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing there on the Isle of Man. So do you want to just fire away there?
Yeah, Fastamai, everybody. Lovely to see you all in the Isle of Man and in the Republic of Ireland. Nice to be meeting up again. I'd like to also welcome our Isle of Man new Environment Minister, the Honourable Claire Barber, to the webinar today. She's hoping to join us, newly appointed, and it's great to have you with us. We have a population of Arctic terns on beaches in the north of the island, chiefly around the Point of Ayre, which is a very popular spot with visitors, both locals and visitors to the island. And so we have sort of protection systems in place of fencing and signage and wardening during the summer months when these incredible travelling creatures are with us. We also have a great Swift project on the go here, the Mount St Ornithological Society, joining up with an organisation called Men in Sheds, who are exactly what it sounds, men in sheds, and making Swift nesting boxes to put on high up on buildings, obviously, so that swifts have a chance. I've got one of each either side of me here, and we have a pack of rather angry and badly behaved. I think it's called a trip, actually, a collection of goats, and badly behaved and nuisance goats who sort of make their presence felt in one particular village in the Isle of Man. Fairly recently, during one of the lockdowns, my friend sent me a photograph of her conservatory, and one of these goats was in her conservatory. So we have all of those species, and we're really interested to hear the webinar today and hear all about them from your perspective.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Joe. Very, very interesting. Thank you. And Eleanor, you're all the way down in Kerry. So, and I believe you want to tell us about a conference that you've got coming up.
Yeah. So we're down in Kerry, and we're actually a mountain biosphere, which is a little bit different to the Isle of Man and Dublin Bay, who have a beautiful coastline to work with. But we have some beautiful mountains, so we don't feel hard done by. At the moment, we have a conference coming up next week on November 5th on how and why to manage the invasive species Rhododendron ponticum, which I'm sure everyone at this stage, well, hopefully everyone at this stage has heard about. It is very prevalent around the west of Ireland, particularly in upland areas, and it is devastating native biodiversity, and it's toxic to livestock, so it needs to be managed. And there's a lot of good work being done on the ground by community groups and community-led projects, so we're hoping to share some of the learnings from those and inspire a few more people to take action. We're also really interested in birds here as well, and our next webinar will be focusing on some of the bird species in the upland areas, because we have some surveys planned for next year on those. So we're very much looking forward to that as well, and hearing about some of your work in Dublin Bay that might help us with that and inspire a bit more action. So thanks very much, Dean.
Fantastic, Eleanor. Thank you for that. So I am just going to share my screen. I've just got a few slides that I'd like to share with you. So give me 1 second. So like I said, this is the 10th in the series of the Tri-Biosphere webinar series. We've done the welcome in the introduction. Just to let those people present know that this is being recorded, and there is an opportunity to view back. The webinar will be on the Kerry Biosphere YouTube channel and the Dublin Bay Biosphere YouTube channel in the coming days. So there will be an opportunity to view it back and maybe share it with friends. So we're going to have a series of presentations. First up is going to be Anne-Marie, then we have a presentation from Hans Visser, and then Lorraine Bull. So about 20-minute presentations, and that will be followed by a Q&A section. So at the bottom of my screen, there's a button with an opportunity for you to ask questions, and we'll take your questions and answer as many of them at the end. And we aim to finish at 1:30. So here we have a fantastic image of the Dublin Bay Biosphere. You have the River Liffey flowing through Dublin Bay and out into Dublin. Sorry, River Liffey flowing through Dublin and out into Dublin Bay. It's rare that we have a UNESCO biosphere within a capital city, and that certainly brings its own benefits and its own challenges. Dublin City has some very old infrastructure, Victoria draining systems in particular, you know, which are a challenge. But the biospheres are actively managed to, you know, conserve what we have and to engage people. So I'll talk about that in a second. We are really fortunate to live in such a wonderful and beautiful place. I mean, these images are of our biosphere. So you've got the further south down in Killiney, you've got views towards Dalkey Island there. You've got Howth Harbour, you've got the bay, and you've got images from North Bell Island there towards Poolbeg. And we're so fortunate to have such important nature reserves on our doorstep, places that we can go in to recharge our batteries, but also places that are important to wildlife. So what is a biosphere? So biospheres are internationally recognised for their biodiversity value, that's first and foremost. But they're also there to promote a balanced relationship between people and nature. And like I said, that can bring its own challenges, but it certainly brings opportunities as well. It's a designation by UNESCO, and the programme was launched in 1971. So this is the 50th anniversary. And again, this series is in recognition of those 50 years and to celebrate those 50 years. There's a global network of 714 biospheres throughout 129 countries. So it's part of a really big network, and it's an opportunity to learn from each other, which is what we've certainly been doing with this series. So the UNESCO Biosphere Goals have three primary objectives. The first is conservation, so protecting what we have, protecting the biodiversity and the cultural diversity. But it's also there for to support businesses, to support people working in the biosphere, and in a sustainable manner. And it's also an opportunity to learn. So the learning is through research that takes place. There's a significant amount of research that goes on to help us manage the biosphere effectively. And from that research, we're able to bring those findings to a wider audience, and this Tri-Biosphere series is part of that. We in the Dublin Bay Biosphere has a vision. The vision there is on the screen. So we want to promote a wider appreciation of our natural and cultural heritage, to capture the inherent passion of the community for the biosphere concept, and for the Dublin Bay Biosphere to be an exemplar for a new wave of biospheres in the World Network. And I know that there's certainly interest in the Biosphere Programme in other parts of Ireland. And in fact, we've been sharing a whole series of webinars primarily aimed at young people during the course of the year, with lockdown being so difficult to connect with people. And we've had visitors from all over the country attending these workshops, these webinars, to get an interest and a passion for our biosphere. So again, there is the extension to our biosphere vision. Recognised as a place valued as a place where people, nature and culture connect, and where residents, visitors and business directly contribute towards the conservation of the natural, culture and built heritage through everyday actions. Some of the things that we're doing to engage our community, we have a Biosphere Award, which is aimed at young people. So if you know any young people that are interested in nature, we have this award. Now, it was developed with Scouting Ireland, so primarily a scout badge, but it's open to any young person. And they have to undertake 3 actions to earn that badge. And they have to connect with nature using all of their senses to really appreciate what's around them. They have to learn about the processes that are taking place and how we as humans can impact our environment, both positively and negatively. And then they have to take some kind of action to protect the biosphere. So that could be through awareness raising, it could be supporting assistance science program, or it could be direct conservation. We also have a Biosphere Challenge, and this is available on our website, the Dublin Bay Biosphere website. And it's aimed primarily at community groups. And it's encouraging people to take simple actions to become a little bit more sustainable themselves and contribute towards the overall management of the biosphere. So again, you can check that out on our website, and there's a special Facebook page on natural habitat that links to. So without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand you over to Anne. Anne, are you ready to go?
Thanks, Dean.
Brilliant.
Yes, I'll just share my screen and you can let me know if there's any issues.
Right.
Okay, so can you see my presentation?
Absolutely. Everything looks fine there, Anne.
Okay. I'll just enlarge it. You can. Is it full screen?
It's not full screen at the moment.
Okay. Let me just change it. So, how's that? Is that okay?
You've got the first slide and then you've got the next slide showing up. Is that how you want it?
Okay. Now,
There
how's
you go.
that?
Perfect.
Great.
Over to you, Anne.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, should I say. My name is Anne Murray. I'm the Biodiversity Officer for Dún Laoghaire County Council, and we are partners of the Dublin Bay Biosphere. And today I'm just going to talk about one of probably our most iconic islands, set of islands, the Dalkey Islands. And it is a very important feature within the Dublin Bay and part of the biosphere. So Dalkey Islands are really significant both in terms of ecology, but also in terms of built heritage, in terms of history, architecture and archaeology, and really has a very important social, cultural influence. And you can see throughout the history of the island how important the interactions between man, nature, and of course land management and land use is in both on Dalkey Island, and you can see from the picture it's very close to our coastline. So there have been, over the years, there has been a lot of interaction with humans on the island. It can be seen from Dublin Bay, across the bay, and also from Wicklow. And it is an important EU designated site also, so what we call a Natura 2000 site. And that is called a special protection area specifically for bird species. And the birds that occur on the island are tern species, common tern, Arctic tern, and roseate tern. And these come to Dalkey Island to breed during the summer, so they're there during from May to October. There are a number of other birds that also nest on the island that are quite important, such as shelduck, but the island is specifically designated for our tern species. And so we work in Dún Laoghaire with Birdwatch Ireland to manage that tern population, to manage the tern colonies. And so you will often see everyone getting busy in preparation for the arrival of the terns, and Birdwatch Ireland staff out on the island, and our own park staff then also monitoring the island throughout the summer. Now, originally this project in terms of managing the terns on Dalkey Island was funded by the EU Life project, and unfortunately that's now finished. It's run its course, but DLR are funding the project from here on in. We also have a herd of goats on the island. You will hear from Hans in his talk about the goats on Howth Head. The goats on Dalkey Island have been there a long time. They're feral goats, but they have adapted to the island, and in fairness to them, it's quite an open and exposed environment that they're in, but they have a shelter there that they go into, and we regularly bring over hay to them during the winter and look after them. But their role on the island really is to actually maintain the habitats on the island and the vegetation, to graze and maintain the vegetation on the island, as well as being a heritage feature in their own right themselves. And so there are a variety of interesting habitats on the island, and because it's a coastal island, and these habitats, in particular for Dún Laoghaire as a county, as a local authority, they're really important to us because we don't really have a lot of coastal habitats that are, for example, coastal grasslands, and a mix of those mosaics of habitats that occur on our coastline. We don't have a lot of them, so Dalkey Island is quite important. It has a variety of rocky outcrops, grassland features, wet grassland. Of course, it has a natural feature of bracken on the island, and it also has around the coast, coastal edge of the island. It has some very interesting intertidal habitats and submerged areas of coastal reefs. So these all contribute to the really wild nature of the island and its isolated nature, because you know, when you walk on the island, one of the things you do notice is how exposed it is. There's not a tree to be found because it couldn't grow there. So the habitats there have tolerated this highly exposed environment, and because of that, they're quite unique. We also have a number of rare plants on the island, and that comes hand in hand with the fact that the habitats are quite unusual as well. And so we've come across a fair few rare habitats. You can see Alexis there on the left-hand side is doing a rare plant survey with his notebook. And as I mentioned earlier, we have coral reefs. They're not the ones you'll see in Australia, but there are the cold coral reefs. And they again are very, very important, a very important habitat on our coastline. And we also have associated with our marine environment, our mammals, our marine mammals, including the harbour porpoise. And so here we have another designated EU site, Rockabill to Dalkey Island, which is designated for both the coral reefs as an important habitat and the harbour porpoise as a very important marine mammal. And not forgetting our seals, of course. Amongst our marine mammals, we have a lot of seals that haul out around Dalkey Island, and our kayakers and other visitors to the island will have seen the seals around the edge of the island, and they're a joy to behold. So really, Dalkey Island is one of the key sites in Dún Laoghaire that is very important for us as a coastal set of islands, for its habitats and species, and for other heritage features, as I mentioned earlier. And so we're closely monitoring the island in order to maintain and protect its heritage and biodiversity value. Now, this is just an infographic that we developed. Now, if you can see the video, I don't know if you can see, I'm clicking on some of the buttons there. That infographic is on the link below at the side there that really gives information. When you click on the buttons, it shows you the information associated with the feature. So that's St. Agnes Church, for example, on the island, tells you about that. And then when you click on some of the other features, for example, the goats, it'll tell you about their importance and also the habitats associated with them. And this infographic is up on our website, and that is the link. So we worked on that with Birdwatch Ireland and with the RSPB and others. So it's just really to raise awareness of the island and to show people what is on the island. Now, we also have signs which really display similar information, and they are signs that are out on the on Collymore Harbour, and they just give a brief description of the heritage, both natural heritage and also the archaeological and the built heritage on the island. And of course, it gives also a nice little identification feature for the various tern species that are on the island. And these are our goats, and these guys are very important as part of our heritage, but also in maintaining and managing the habitats on the island. And you can see they're enjoying a rest there. And this little guy is looking at one of our signs. So that sign is a sign that we put up during the summer months. I don't know if you can see it there. There you go. So it's really indicating restricted areas on the island, where we're asking people not to go. Now, currently they're temporary and they're underground, largely because it's very difficult from a heritage perspective. The island is quite restricted in terms of what we can put up on poles. So for the moment, we're putting them temporary on the ground. And they indicate to people where not to go on the island during the summer months to protect our ground nesting tern species. And this sign on the right is a code of conduct sign for visitors. So again, it's indicating, you know, don't disturb the ground nesting birds, don't light fires, don't bring over dogs. There's a few things we're asking people not to do. And we also work with the boatman who brings visitors over to the island in order to make sure that visitors are aware of the constraints of what they can do on the island. And the boatman is very, very cooperative and helps out in getting that message out there. So this is just, you can see the group of people there, they're viewing the island from the mainland, and you can see how close Dalkey Island is to the mainland there. And to the right of that is just some of the bird nesting boxes that our staff have made, and some of the men's sheds, etc., are making for the terns. And really, you know, as terns they nest on the ground, the pressures of sea rise, of flooding, and storminess has really pushed them, you know, to corners of the island that they can be protected from those sort of events. But also they have to face the pressures of predation from rats and gulls. And so we've implemented rat control on the island over the last few years. And that's an ongoing problem, really, because rats can swim. So we're taking them off, and you know, they're being managed, but you can't. It's very difficult to stop them from swimming across. But our staff and Birdwatch Ireland have done a massive, monumental job on really managing the island with us for the birds. So despite all the challenges that these tiny little creatures face, things have been great. In 2020, we had 30 chicks that took flight, and they would have been returning then after, once the breeding season had finished, they would be returning back to their wintering grounds. And this year, I don't have the full update yet on what's happened during the summer fully, but it was looking very promising at the start of the year, and the birds had actually nested and established nests very much ahead of the previous year. So it looked like things were going in the right direction. And just example of our monitoring, the trail cameras recorded 2 colour-ringed Arctic terns on Dalkey Island, and one was a chick from back in 2017 who had nested on Maiden Rock, which is part of Dalkey Island. And now 3 years later, it was spotted feeding its own young. And it's lovely to see that continuation and that success, you know, of what's been done. And the second was Arctic terns, with really a more interesting story. At the start of the season last year, 3,000 Arctic terns disappeared from the Skerries Islands colony in Wales, and one of them turned up in Dalkey Island and actually nested and had young in Dalkey Island. So you can see that interaction and that importance of protecting sites across Ireland and the UK that are all interacting with each other. And finally, roseate terns, which we were hoping would nest on Dalkey Island, haven't yet, but there was 2 spotted checking out the island last year. So we'll see what happens. So it really does highlight the importance of protecting all our breeding sites for these birds, and you know, they can turn up anywhere, as we say, and so it's really important for us in Dún Laoghaire to protect them. And then the habitats, in terms of managing our islands, we've had a problem with rabbits also. So these rabbits are not native rabbits. These are rabbits that have been dumped on the island, say, if somebody had a pet and they no longer wanted it. And unfortunately then, we don't have a predator on the island that's going to manage them. for us. So the rabbits have kind of run out of control, and so they can really cause problems with the habitat. They can overgraze. They lead to exposing the soil and the peat, making it more susceptible to erosion. They've created burrows, which also are creating unconsolidated areas on the habitat, but also even for people walking across it. So the place is peppered with them. So we've been managing them, and we took out 600 in 1 year alone. So you can see the extent of the problem there. And there are a number of surveys that have been completed, and we have a monitoring program in place for monitoring the habitats on the island, and also for monitoring the flora, in particular the rare plants. And so that photo on the left is a rare spring vetch, Vitiula thyroides, which occurs on the island, and it is typical of sandy coastal grasslands, and it kind of lies flat, it's prostrate, and so it can be quite easily overlooked because it's quite a teeny tiny plant, and those leaves there are only a couple of millimeters in size. So these are the type of plants that occur on the island that are quite rare. So it's important that we look after the habitats in order to keep these rare plants. And this is the habitat map of the island, and you can see there where all the different habitats are. And the value of that information is crucial for us, because we need to understand, where these habitats are, and how they develop over the years, or if they decline, and if that decline is associated with things such as the rabbit overgrazing, etc. Then we have the surrounding area of Dalkey Island, which is under the surface, and I did mention the coral reefs briefly there. And Muglan's Rock, which is part of the island, is a popular dive spot, and it has a massive amount of filter feeders sitting underneath on the granite below, and also that coral reef up on the left hand, courtesy of ocean divers. That shows, a very diverse coral reef, very colourful, very beautiful, and an important part of ecosystems in our marine environment. And these are the areas I will be looking to learn more about and to do more surveys on over the coming years. And so we also have to manage our visitors on the island. They're very welcome, but we do need to ensure that they are aware of the sensitivities of the island, in particular for our birds and for our seals, our marine mammals, and habitats. And so we have installed a footfall counter on the island at the steps as you go onto the island, to see, how many people are using the island, and where are the peak times where we might need more monitoring or need more people. And so I commissioned two Dalkey Island Tern wardens this year, in order to kind of address these type of scenarios where you have a lot of people on the island. And funnily enough, they actually encountered illegal hunters on the island. So you just never know, what's going on, unless you have eyes and ears on the ground, which is very important, and which we'll continue to do. And as I say, not forgetting our goats on the island. We have retained a vet who looks after them, and he's brilliant. He monitors them regularly. He often goes out weekly. Now he lives locally, he has his own boat, and he's brilliant at looking after them. He gives them any medical treatments they need, and of course between ourselves and the vet we bring over hay, etc. in the winter. We've cleaned out their shelter, make sure that everything is in order, and also Ken the boatman keeps a good eye on everything over on the island as well. So so I'd like to thank you all for listening, and that's our work on Dalkey Island. Dean, I don't know if I've overrun my time or...
No, you're perfect, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll stop
we,
sharing now.
We started a little bit behind, and you managed to give us a minute back there, so that's fantastic. Greatly appreciated. And very fascinating. And there's a couple of questions coming in, but we're going to leave them to the end, and we're going to take all the questions together. So we're going to hand over now to Hans. Hans, are you there? There he is. Fantastic. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So you have the floor, so you've got 20 minutes, Hans. Fantastic. Thank you.
This all right? Can you see
Yeah.
this?
Perfect.
Yeah, okay. Right, I suppose from the Fingal County Council's perspective, we are kind of looking at the northern end of Dublin Bay. So where Anne was talking about Dalkey Island here, our area, our county council kind of looks after this whole, well, like this northern belt over here. I'll be mainly talking about Howth Head. Just to give you some impression what it looks like, it's actually still very natural looking. We just have two big golf courses in the center. There's heathland in the center here. There's loads of natural grass all on the sides, and then there's houses that are sort of sitting on the side of that. And just to give you some impression, what I suppose the top of that hill, actually, it's a lot of heathland with the golf course in the center of that. Now, a large chunk of it, of the natural bit, is basically designated as a special area of conservation, and it's designated for heathland as well as cliffs. So we have all the vegetated cliffs sort of along the side of that, and then we have the heathland basically slightly further in. Now, in terms of key pressure that we're dealing with is recreational pressure, the landscape management, as to how we go about it, the wetland disappearance and wildfires. Those are the key issues that we're dealing with. Now, kicking off, I suppose, with the recreational pressure, we also have pedestrian counters along various of our pathways. We kind of know that the Howth is visited, like a pathway network is visited around 750,000 people per year. That is a lot of pressure. Like we have around 20 kilometers of pathway. There's around 6 circular routes that people can walk that are all signposted and waymarked. But I suppose like it brings in a lot of people, and with that also like it brings in a lot of pressure that way as well, because it's not only pedestrians that we have here, we also have horse riding and mountain biking and the likes of that. So for us to deal with that, like we did a study about it, like we did a study on this about 2 years ago, and on that basis we actually started like a massive pathway improvement job where we spent around €1 million basically upgrading all the pathways, because it was happening that they were getting wider and wider, particularly in locations where the pathway quality was rather poor. People started walking on the edges, and the paths became wider as a result of that. And we actually calculate over those 20 kilometers, you actually have a good 10 acres of land base that was actually lost due to that. So what we have done now, we have basically like repaired the pathways, fixed the verges, and as a result of that, now we have been able to restore a fair bit of it. And even for UK visitors, we also got a royal seal of approval. They were I think your crown prince was here basically, I think 2 years ago now, also testing the pathway, so he was very happy with it. So if there's any other UK visitors coming after this, it's only a good thing for us, I suppose. Now, what hasn't really been dealt with are some key Vista Points, and unfortunately, Google Maps is, I suppose, partly to blame for that, because it shows here as the key viewing point, and everybody wants to go there. Well, the viewing points actually used to be along here. So what you see here basically is the damage that is done to the heathland. The soil here is about 2 to 3 centimeters thick, so it's very thin, and repetitive trampling over that kind of causes these pathway networks to develop. This is something that we intend to address over the next 2 years, where with some new, I suppose, restoration techniques that we want to try, just to see if that will actually help to kind of avoid this problem. Now, moving on to our wetlands then. Again, we have done some wetland surveys there last year to kind of get a better idea what we have. So we found actually a lot of streams around that partly have been covered, like through either vegetation or due to undergrounding. Again, when you kind of look at historical maps, actually a lot of those were already present as well. The source areas of a lot of those were actually like spring areas, and they were actually boggy areas, so they're sort of indicated sort of in orange on the various locations. But we also had much bigger wetlands, and that they're highlighted in yellow, that have actually disappeared. And so the overall story, I suppose, what we're seeing is a massive decline in terms of wetland plants. I suppose a reference here was sort of around like at the beginning of the 19th century, when some of the botanists were basically going around here to actually see, and I suppose we record a lot of wetland plants, but a lot of those have disappeared since. And so the Howth is definitely, I suppose, a lot of the landscape area is certainly drying out. which is a major problem, particularly like I'll come to it now in terms of wildfire management. But what's basically been happening as the wetlands are drying out, what's happening now that the bracken is taken over, and the trees are basically moving in. And I suppose if we weren't doing anything about this, eventually, like this would all be, I suppose, most of the wetland, like because this used to have lots of rare orchids in it, for example, most of those have now disappeared. So we're certainly also looking at restoration measures in order to try to kind of deal with that. And particularly, we know there's some people in the center of Howth that have wells in them. The golf course have wells in them as well. So I suppose that will be a first step to kind of reduce the overall amount of water that's being pulled out of the groundwater in order to restore this. Now, I suppose with the drying also comes another problem, which is wildfire. And this is something now that, like, increasingly over the last couple of years has become a big issue for us. We've had, like, on average, there's around 20 fires on Howth. But when they happen, when some of those happen, they're big ones, as you can see here, that actually will burn for weeks. There's a lot of, in the past, this wasn't so much a problem, like, because there was very little people living here, but nowadays, like, there's a lot of expenses, houses right on the doorstep, and you can see the fire brigade spent like literally weeks to kind of making sure that these wildfires actually don't reach these properties. And in terms of, I suppose, other problems causes, Howth is actually underneath the flight line for Dublin Airport. So the problems that this is causing is quite phenomenal in so many different ways. And the last fire we had now was in July and August this year, where this hill that you see here actually was burning for about 6 weeks. And it caused similar smoke plumes and the likes of that as well, where people also had to keep their doors and windows closed for 6 weeks in a row as well. The fire brigade did manage to get it under control, but it took a long time for them to get to that point. I suppose in 2018 we had our last really big fire, and after that, I suppose, because we have to start addressing this. So we actually had international wildfire experts that came out to have a look at how to actually determine the wildfire risk that is there, and they basically found that a large part of the landscape was actually at very high wildfire risk. So just to kind of give you some idea about this, this is the most extreme version of how fast the fire can spread, like with an easterly wind. If the ignition point is somewhere around here, so if the fire were to start here, this is within the first hour. The red line is hour number 2. The blue line is hour number 3, 4, and 5. So in 5 hours, a good half of Howth basically could be on fire. Now, this would overwhelm the fire services very, very easily. Similarly, they actually looked sort of at the vegetation composition and the height of that to kind of look at flame length. So again, there's particularly the eastern half where most of the flame lengths are going to be over 5 meters, but basically it's impossible for the fire brigade to actually put these out. Similarly, like there was hot spots in here, and on the side there. So although the top, I suppose, is not extreme high wildfire risk, these areas are as well. And also because of the flame intensity and the flame lengths, and basically we do know that, and like that, this was almost impossible for the fire brigade to put out. And this is also where we have a huge urban rural interface, if you want to call it, or like urban fire interface. So for us, this was a major wake-up call to actually know, when we actually, I suppose, when it spelled out how dangerous this actually can be. So what we basically have been doing since, fire breaks have been created all over the landscape base to kind of cut the whole of Howth Head into smaller parcels. The whole idea with the fire breaks is basically to give the Dublin Fire Brigade a chance to actually stop fires as they happen. So if fires were to travel sideways, they get interrupted, like on either on the side or was traveling up the hill. And the whole idea with those, they're anywhere between sort of 20 and 40 meter wide areas that are completely cleared and that are to remain sort of low growing vegetation. The fire can actually burn its way to the taller gorse or the taller header until they get to that point, because the fire brigade can't control that. But once it gets here and the fire starts to kind of, the flame length basically goes down to sort of half a meter, at that point basically the fire brigade can actually start to kind of put control measures on it by means of water, or even just by means of mechanical means, for example. So what we've been doing then is, like, in all the strategic areas, we had diggers in here. This was not particularly popular with the local community. We saw this as a major environmental vandalism, and I suppose as a result of that, we have also done a lot more public consultation evenings or public information evenings to explain to people, I suppose, what we're doing and why we're doing it. And once that actually has been done, that actually a lot of the anger, I suppose, has disappeared, because once they fully understood why we're actually doing this, it actually, like, they kind of realized actually that their own properties were in danger as a result of this as well. Now the idea then, once all the gorse is removed, like this is this just started 2 months ago, where we have appointed a herder, and we're working with the Old Irish Goat Society to kind of work with the Old Irish goats. They will basically be grazing these fire breaks. The whole idea, like we kind of looked at a sort of a cost comparison in terms of, I suppose, having to mow the fire breaks and collect all the stuff, spraying the fire breaks, and I suppose then we also looked at grazing of these strips, and it's more cost effective to actually graze the fire breaks than actually by means of mechanical means. But it also actually adds a whole new, I suppose, historical feature, because there used to be goat herders on Howth, and they disappeared in the 1950s, and I suppose, and I'll come back to that later on, but that's one of the reasons why I suppose we have so much problems now with gorse after a lot of the grazing disappeared. So by reinstating this historical or traditional management of the hill, we kind of hope not only to, I suppose, to kind of make to deal with the wildfire issue, but also actually restoring some of the historical landscape management tools that used to, I suppose, that were here in the past. In terms of the other actions for the wildfire management plan, the idea base is to set up a wildfire group. So this is a group that made up from both the local authority, the Dublin Fire Brigade, and local residents at various locations around Howth Head. The whole idea for them is basically to kind of look at all the measures that need to be taken and how that's to be communicated to the local community. And similarly also for the fire brigade, for example, to actually see exactly what measures need to be taken either by them, or also for us, I suppose, where we need to kind of take the most urgent measures. And the whole idea is more that the local community can kind of then see what's basically going on. Similarly, like wildfire training for the Dublin Fire Brigade, most fire brigades in Ireland are not actually trained to respond to wildfires. That's also something we learned, which was rather surprising. So we have been providing training for the fire brigade, I suppose, to deal with these issues and to look at fire management much more strategically. In terms of the managing of the vegetation, the strategic management areas, so these are the sort of strategic fire breaks anywhere near our houses. And we also have to figure out as to where we're going to get more water, because again, the Dublin Fire Brigade found that their trucks are running out so quickly, and when they plugged into the main supply, they actually took the pressure off so much that a lot of people in Howth didn't have any water anymore. And then also we have to develop a operational wildfire plan. So this is a plan that the fire brigades they will have in their trucks. So when they arrive on site, they know exactly who to contact. They know where the fire brigade are. They know where the water points are. So again, it's more like a practical tool basically when a fire actually happens. So we have divided such that we will do the landscape management, while the fire brigade, once the fire actually starts, that they will actually deal with the wildfire issue to kind of make sure that these wildfires stay as small as possible. Going on to the management, so I suppose the wildfire management is a big issue, but I suppose you have the wider landscape to look at as well. Now it's kind of going back to this. This is sort of the landscape that you have here basically, and at the moment, like, it's all fairly open. But the question, I suppose, is how do we want this landscape to look like in the future? In the past, we do know it was grazed. So this is a picture from the 1950s. A lot of people here used to keep goats on Howth for either the milk or meat supply. There was some livestock as well on the richer ground, and I suppose the goats were kind of the poor people's cow, effectively. And there would have been some horse grazing and donkey grazing associated with either the carts or like in some of the smaller mines that were out there. So we do know it was grazed on a regular basis, but that all stopped in the 1950s with improvements of agricultural methods. Basically, a lot of this grazing disappeared, and I suppose after that we have seen a major increase in I suppose in terms of overall biomass on the hill, but also in terms of gorse and bracken. So there's a bit like this change has caused kind of significant change to the landscape. The problem, I suppose, is that a lot of people on Howth, the new housing estates were all built in the 1970s and 1980s. A lot of people there, I suppose, have been walking this hill now for years and kind of assumed work on the basis that Howth Head is a natural landscape, which is not. And I suppose we have, through public consultation evenings, we're explaining that, we're trying to explain to people what is actually, this is a farm landscape. And again, only the older people, so we have a few people in the 90s, they actually remember, I suppose, this type of landscape that wasn't the past, but a lot of new people that are there now don't. And I suppose that also then means it comes and lead to conflict in terms of like, well, how do you actually manage areas like this? Because like, I should let nature do its thing, but I suppose this landscape will change completely if you actually would do that. So in certain areas, like, nature should be allowed to I suppose to do its own thing. In other places where we have, particularly with rare plants or rare bird life, we actually try to intervene. So in this case, in this area here, we have sort of a mixture of gorse and heather and just grasslands. What we basically plan to do is to kind of use both goats and Dexter cattle to graze these areas. Now, the local community, when we did a management plan for this particular parcel of land, they were adamant that there was to be no fencing. They didn't want that, so we said, like, well, we'll actually look at the technological options in this case. So we're actually using these colors. This is a no fence technology from Norway. And it's basically like a virtual fence, and so far that actually has worked really, really well. And it basically means that you can just program the area that you want your livestock to graze, and it just means that you don't need fences. And then, like, once, like, I suppose it was usually seasonal grazing, once the season is over, you can just take them out of there, and then it will be free. It will be left as it was. So, and this is something we're kind of looking at now, in terms of whether we can also do something similar with horses and potentially pigs, but they haven't really been tested. Like, no fence collars have not been tested on those animals, so we'll have to wait and see how that goes. It's a slow process to train animals for this, may I add, but that's ultimately, I suppose, what we're kind of looking at. So it's trying to restore that older, the traditional landscape management type. And similarly, like where the hay meadows used to be in the past, again, I would do this mechanically, but again, like we're just making small bales basically, and we actually selling that to the local horse owners that always had a massive shortage of winter feed as well. So it basically meant that actually local people actually benefit from the nature conservation measures here too. There was also a heathland management study done then, with loads of recommendations, but I suppose the big one for us was to reduce the proportion of bracken and gorse by, well, almost basically 40 hectares, or like that was almost 100 acres, which is quite significant. There's quite a significant change in the landscape. So I suppose we're really trying to figure out as to how we're going to do that. So it's trying to change those two habitat types into sort of dry heath, grassland or woodland. And this is also really engagement with the public and the landowners, where we have to kind of talk about, like, well, how do we actually ultimately want to manage this landscape? Are we going to go down the mechanical route? Are we going to go down the physical route, or like with grazing or chemicals and the likes of that? So, Dean, am I still in time? 1 minute, okay, well, that's good. I should be able to do that. We kind of looked at sort of the historical management as well. So in this case, these were records that they were able to extract from a local bog to kind of tell us exactly, like, I suppose, what was there. So this bog actually developed in 1438. Well, there's a I suppose a 26 years of a difference there potentially, but it kind of shows in terms of the charcoal presence within this bog. It basically actually showed that like one time in the 15th century was a big fire, and then from the 1950s onwards, which was quite interesting. So basically, wildfire management on this heathland was not actually heathland management burning was not actually common at all. And it's only after the grazing disappeared, and you kind of see it from 1950s onwards with big fires in 1968, 1983. That actually charcoal suddenly appears. So that's actually, for us, it was a really good indicator in terms of kind of looking at the management. Similarly, we're able to also look at what was there in the past. So again, in the 15th century, that was able to tell that all the birch and hazel were actually quite common together with grasses. And as time sort of went by, the trees sort of disappeared, and after 1830, when the management seems to become a bit more active, that's sort of when pine comes in, and heather also, and I suppose the grasses were still the same as well, but bracken also seems to increase big time after that period. So there's some very interesting changes, I suppose, that we can see. But in terms of a reference picture, these I suppose, going all the way back to the Middle Ages, basically will give us a very decent idea what the past looked like. And even we go further, we know as well, because in the bogs on top of Howth, we actually had the antlers found of these giant Irish deer. And again, from the pollen records, we know that used to be, they used to live in a landscape of heather and grasses as well. And that's 13,000 years ago. So there's always been a fairly open landscape that many thousands of years back, and even until fairly recent, I suppose. So the landscape that you see here now is actually maybe not all that similar, in the sense there's a lot of heather there, but it used to be a lot more diverse. And so in terms of we're kind of like what we're looking in terms of a future reference, this is more what we're looking like. Then you're kind of looking more at Sweden, where you basically have sort of a mixture of heathland, grassland, and copses then of birch, alder, and hazel. So that's, I suppose, where we kind of want to go, and it requires a lot of consultation with locals and with landowners to kind of for them to understand, well, why do we want to do this, and also how we're going to maintain that in terms of grazing animals and everything. All right, that's me done.
Hans, that's amazing, fascinating stuff, really fascinating stuff. The work that goes on in the background to understand what's happened in the past, and what we need to do going forward is phenomenal. So thank you so much for that. So now we're over to Lorraine. Lorraine, looking forward to hearing your presentation as well. Thank you. So you have around about 20 minutes.
Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. Can everybody hear me and see me okay?
Yeah, see you and see that
and
hear
see
you
the
fine.
screen?
You can see the screen.
Perfect. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Lorraine. I'm the Biodiversity Officer for Dublin City Council. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our SWIFT survey, but also just give a brief overview of some of our conservation projects. So across the city, conservation for biodiversity is managed through the Dublin City Biodiversity Action Plan. I'm just highlighting it here because we're actually just on the point of bringing out the updated plan. This will be the third plan for the city, and we have themes, objectives, and over 80 actions for biodiversity, including maintaining nature, restoring nature, building for biodiversity, which is technical documents for planners, but also looking at making Dublin a green capital city. And then there's also education and partnerships as well. And as with the other partners here, we're a full member of the Dublin Bay Biosphere Partnership. So just to give an overview, like we're all talking here about specific projects today, but we all have a range of projects that we work on. So some of the types of projects we've been working on over the last couple of years in Dublin City is looking at the ectocarpus growth in Dublin Bay, that's with NUIG. Looking at invasive species in various aquatic habitats across the city with UCD. We monitor the seagrass beds at Sandymount. We've been part of the National Hedgehog Survey, which I know the other councils have been as well. We're also working on wetland restoration. There's also bird ringing and nesting schemes in our city parks, and also breeding bird surveys on North Bull Island with Birdwatch Island. So as part of other work that we do with Birdwatch Island, this year we've done the Dublin City Swift survey. So this was launched back in May. We hosted a webinar with Birdwatch. Ricky Reelam from Birdwatch gave a talk for people. And if you're interested in finding out about that talk, you can email me at biodiversity@dublincity.ie and I can send you the link to that. So really this is the first systematic survey of swifts across the city. So swifts are small migratory birds that visit Ireland each year. They come here from South Africa for our summer months. They spend about 8 months of the year in Southern Africa. And you can actually encounter swifts in Dublin and in the other areas as well between May and August. Now they have a distinctive screaming call. So I'm just going to stop sharing a second, because I just want to play the swift call for you. So I'll just do that now. Okay. Can you hear that okay, Dean?
Yeah, perfect, thank you.
Perfect, great. So generally you'll actually hear swifts before you see them. So if you are living anywhere within Dublin City District, and if you come across these sounds in the summer, please do also let us know. So again, I'll just go back to the other screen. So as I was saying, they're a small migratory bird. They have that distinctive screaming call there. So swifts actually have adapted to nesting in cavities in the sides of buildings in both cities, towns and villages. They're seriously threatened, unfortunately, in Ireland. This is due primarily to the loss of nesting sites, but also they're being really impacted by climate change. A lot of swift populations have actually been affected by bad storms as they're migrating to and from Africa. And as we know, with climate change, we're getting more of those storms. So they really are, unfortunately, in decline. So there's declines of about 58% in less than 20 years. So that's a really large number. And unfortunately, they're now red listed on the birds of conservation concern here in Ireland. So really part of this survey was doing the first systematic citywide survey, and that's looking at swifts observed and also the active swift nesting colonies. And really why we do a lot of research is in order to conserve something, we need to know about it. So we need to know where it lives, we need to know its food resources. And again, we need to look at the numbers of populations to see if they're actually in decline, because then we can increase conservation measures to try and reverse those declines. So I'm just going back here. So these are buildings in both Sandymount and also Mountjoy. So again, right across the city, swifts are being found. So this survey, the fieldwork ran from May 24th for 5 weeks. Now Birdwatch Island were the surveyors on the project, and they contracted 2 of their surveyors. They covered 59 locations that were identified as having good potential for swifts. So some of those locations were known in advance. Other locations were identified actually through work that Birdwatch does and other groups within the council with community groups across the city. So again, this is a good example of how community groups actually can have a really good and positive impact to citizen science and pure science projects across the city. So this year, because of COVID restrictions, normally what would happen is a workshop would be hosted. Birdwatch would go and do a talk with the group and actually physically walk around an area. But this year, a lot of that was curtailed due to social distancing. So we actually hosted online webinars, and then a lot of work was actually done through digital and local print media. And again, just to stress, the reports from local people were actually crucial as part of this work as well. So of 59, this is a map from the summer. So these are some of the nesting sites. There's been an updated map since this time. But of the 59 localities surveyed, the swifts were found in 41 locations. So over 300 swifts were recorded and 129 nest sites were identified. Now, as you can see, of the sort of northeast part of the city, that's really, really important for swifts. And then again, you've got there Harold's Cross, Rathmines, Dublin 8, and you've got another cluster there. You've also got then a couple of outlying clusters as well. Some of this is due to survey effort, because obviously there were only so many locations that could be surveyed, but also is indicative of you know, the presence of just swifts in those particular areas. So really the areas surveyed that were found, most important locations for swift in Dublin include Stony Batter, Drumcondra, Ballyfermot, Rathmines and also Cabra. So again, when you're thinking, these are very built up areas, but a lot of older buildings in the city, and combined this was 47% of the swift nests in Dublin City. So this provides key information. It allows us to take first steps in protecting these sites and also instigating recommendations that we were given by Birdwatch to help these vulnerable colonies. So sometimes when you know, people are repointing a house, or if they're actually getting roof repairs, they can actually block off sites for swifts. And swifts are actually site faithful. So generally, if they lose a nesting site, that's it. They won't necessarily be able to nest in that area again. And again, this causes a big problem for the species. But once we know that there's actually swifts in an area, we can then, as I say, work with local community groups. And also sometimes some of the bigger institutions, like we're actually looking with Birdwatch at, you know, sites like Collins's Barracks, you know, the National Museum, possibly even the likes of the Law Library, and sites like that. And again, the Garda headquarters in Phoenix Park, that area around there, that sort of northern part of the city is really important for swifts. So we know that they're there, so we can then actually put steps in place to help encourage more swifts nesting. Also as well, the project, it gave a lot of user-friendly information for swift nest sites across the city. There were new sites that were recorded, which was also very positive as well. It also inspires both ourselves, both in the council, to you know, put in a concerted effort to protect the swifts in these areas, but also with those local community groups as well. we have people that work with community groups as well as ourselves, and swifts are one of those species that people really actually engage with. But also what we'd like to do is establish these new nesting sites and really help promote swift numbers in Dublin, because there's been such a decline. So how we can actually do this, we've got next steps. So this was the first phase of the project. So we'd have the research element to the project. And actually I should say that as the surveyors went around, a lot of the time they actually did it by bicycle. So they'd actually cycle around areas of the city, and they'd be doing that by listening to swift calls, identifying where swift colonies were. And so the next step would be to continue monitoring these areas. So we could have had, you know, we've over 129 nesting sites established or identified this year. We could potentially have more next year, or we may have fewer. We don't know, but we really need to monitor, you know, the swift population. And again, we do that through community groups, but also institutions that I mentioned before. So things that can also be encouraged, both for existing sites, but also new sites, is installing of swift bricks. So there's a swift brick here, just an example here. This is from the Birdwatch website, and there's also swift boxes. So what we can do is, if we find suitable locations or potential suitable locations, is put up swift boxes, and then we actually play swift calls, and then try and encourage swifts to those sites. In the council, we're also working on a technical document, and that's for our developers and planners. And that's, again, if we're doing any new builds, properties, or as part of planning applications, we can identify, now we have these areas, we can say, you know, in new developments, in new sites, can the development actually include, you know, swift bricks for the local swift population? And then also, if people are repointing, or as I say, they're doing roof repairs, or if there's retrofit. So retrofit now, with climate change, there'll be a big push to retrofit a lot of buildings. And a lot of the swifts are nesting in residential properties. So again, we have technical guidelines for both our developers and our planners. But also Birdwatch Island has a Saving Swifts booklet, and we'll be distributing that to DCC libraries. So that's really to give people advice on, if they have swifts in their area, what they can do to try and keep the swifts actually nesting on their site, with some of the retrofitting that I've discussed there just now. So more information just in relation to this, there's a swifts@birdwatchisland.ie email address, but also you can download the Saving Swifts guide free from the Birdwatch Island website. And I've just got the link here, but if you Google Saving Swifts Guide Island, that will come up. So I realise I've actually blown through that quite a bit, but it was just to give you an idea, a flavour of that's the Swift project that we're working on. And the next stage, as I say, is actually putting in those measures to try and increase the swift population. So as part of the talk today, we also wanted obviously to share information with people about what people can do at home for biodiversity. So getting involved in citizen science projects such as the Swift project, but also this year we've been involved in the National Hedgehog Survey. So that was where people could actually sign up and get tunnels that they put out during the summer months to see if they had hedgehogs in their garden. So if you're at home at the moment, or if you have a garden, now some of this can also apply to balconies as well, garden spaces, and also small green spaces. We're obviously coming into the winter months, so a lot of the biodiversity we have across the city you know, is starting to wind down. They need fattening up. Some species will be going into hibernation. But really doing small steps even at home can actually encourage biodiversity and improve biodiversity in your local area. So providing shelter, food, water, not using pesticides in your garden. Back in 2018 in Dublin City Council, we set up a herbicide policy where we'd actually phase out the use of glyphosate. And I know the other councils have similar initiatives as well. Not clearing rubbish. So we tend to be, especially for gardeners, a little bit too tidy. So if you could actually allow areas of the garden, if you've got the plants of hollow stems, is actually leave them be, and insects will actually bore into those. So again, we know about bird boxes, you know, or you might have trees or hedges in your garden. There's also installing of bat boxes. So insect hotels, the large scale, you know, made of pallets and brick, they don't always work. Large hotels can actually encourage disease, and a lot of the insects we actually want them for won't actually target those hotels. They are a great education tool. So it's actually better to have small bee hotels of different materials. A pile of logs and twigs works just as well though, and if there are any holes in log, or if you can drill holes in logs, that will also help. Also leaving bare earth for solitary bees. The queen bumblebees as well will actually hibernate over the winter, and then in the summer months is leaving a patch unmown for the summer. And these are just examples of some insect hotels that have been done by a school in Raheny. And as I was saying, in winter, bird boxes and bird feeders, there's a problem with disease. So if you have bird boxes in your garden, if you could actually clean them out and sterilize them. If you have bat boxes, bats could be hibernating somewhere else, so just bear that in mind. And again, just leave areas and leave hollow stems for insects. And then there's different mowing regimes. I mean, there's lots of resources out there now, but just to add that native wildflowers, you know, dandelions, generally we think as a garden is enemy number one. But they're really, really crucial for spring. So if you could not mow until the end of April, and then you mow then every 4 to 6 weeks. And things like nettles are really, really important for butterfly species, and also clover as well. So these are just some considerations for your own garden. Now there's excellent resources out there. So the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, pollinators.ie, has a list of plants for pollinators and also actions that you can take. And then part of the Hedgehog project is this Helping Hedgehogs guide, which has come out, and there's a link there online. So irishhedgehogsurvey.com, and there's information about how you can help hedgehogs at different times of the year. So that's part of the work that we certainly do in Dublin City Council. As I say, there'll be Biodiversity Action Plan coming out in the next couple of months, and that will have a list of all of the other projects that we're working on. But I hope that gave you a flavour of the types of projects that we're working on at the moment. So
that was amazing. Thank you, Lorraine. Yeah, I mean, with all the three presenters this afternoon, they've all given a small snapshot on some of the work that they're doing. And there's an awful lot more that's going on besides, but it's good to have that flavour. And you know, those tips that you gave, Lorraine, for how everyone can get involved and do a little something that helps our natural heritage is really, really brilliant, amazing. I mentioned at the start of the video that the Biosphere Challenge, and it covers some of those points, you know, how we can live a little bit more sustainably and how we can, you know, changes that we can make to help protect nature. So that's amazing. So we're now to the Q&A section, and I know there's been a few comments in the chat, and there's a question there. So I'm going to start off with the question there from Lorcan Scott, and it's for Anne in regards to Dalkey Island. So was Dalkey Island structures ever checked for storm petrels?
Thanks, Dean. So storm petrels are generally breeding on the west coast of Ireland. So the seabird surveys are carried out by Birdwatch Ireland every so often, every 10 or 15 years. And they identify the areas that storm petrels are using in terms of breeding. Now, the storm petrels do use our coastline for non-breeding, for feeding purposes, and foraging areas. So certainly they are noted. Storm petrel have been noted along our coastline, but we haven't had any specific dedicated survey of the structures on Dalkey Island. But it's something we can always ask Birdwatch Ireland about. I'm sure they would have spotted them. You know, Birdwatch Ireland helped do a great amount of work with us on Dalkey Island, so I'd say they would have, you know, come to a conclusion about if we needed to do more surveys for that specific bird, you know. So I'll certainly ask them again, though, Lorcan, if it is something they feel would be worthwhile to do.
Great stuff. Joe, you had a couple of questions there in the chat. Did you want to vocalize them, or a couple of points that you made?
Yeah, not so much questions really. I thought the whole presentation, all three presentations, are really fascinating and superb, and I'm going to share them very widely here because I know that people from our Wildlife Trust, etc., will be really interested to watch this back. I certainly think that the work on the fire sort of mapping and mitigation and Howth will be of great interest to our uplands manager, and I've already dropped him an email to tell him all about it. And also I was just kind of saying that along the lines that you guys are doing with the Swifts, you know, our biodiversity officers, and Sophie is on the webinar today. Chiefly she is leading on this. Very much doing exactly what you're doing, you know, encouraging developers to think about Swifts and indeed all other sort of benefits for nature when, you know, right at the outset of planning applications, and you know, putting in anything that will attract the Swifts. So I'm sure our team would be really interested to learn that too.
Fantastic. Just coming back to Lorcan said, thanks, Anne. They do breed on Salty Island. Might be too close, but it would be nice to rule them out. So there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks, Lorcan. Really appreciate that. Is there another comment coming through? That's done. Okay, so fantastic.
Sorry, yeah, I have a question there as well.
Go
sorry.
for it,
It's following up on something that you mentioned in the chat earlier, so I'm sort of stealing your question. But it's definitely something that arises a lot here, particularly in the McGillicuddy Reeks area, is about the footfall figures, the impact of COVID, whether you saw an increase and a decrease, and then if you have any information about how you collect those figures, and how you expect to manage into the future with what we're seeing is increasing recreational use of these areas.
Thanks, Elaine. Yeah, Eleanor, sorry. I think for us, the footfall counter, we installed it there just actually before COVID. So we had our kind of baseline, but because I suppose Dalkey Island, generally for most of the public, if they want to get to Dalkey Island, there's only one licensed boatman that we have given permission to cross over to carry passengers, and so that curtails a certain amount of visitor pressure. But that's not to say that other people access the island other ways, such as kayaking or coming on boats from other places. But during COVID, because of the restrictions, the boatman wasn't doing tours, so that reduced the amount of people that were visiting the island. Yeah,
fantastic. Can I ask a general question for all three of you? It's the one pressure on the areas that you manage, you know, by the public, that if that pressure was taken away would make a massive difference. So if so, what is that one pressure, if you had to say one? And on the flip side, what is the one thing that the public can do at home in their local communities that will really help nature? So Lorraine, you're top of my screen, so I'm going to let you go first, as you went last.
In terms of pressures, I mean, Jogs Off Lead is a big one for North Bull Island, you know, within Dublin City Council, but also in some other places and other parks as well. And that's really impacting on, you know, sometimes people will see a dog chase birds and they think, oh, it's kind of a bit of play and there isn't really the impact. When you actually look at some of the bird species that we have here in Dublin, in all of the areas, you know, they're migrating thousands and thousands of miles. You know, we've got the Brent geese coming in now over 4,500 kilometers from the Arctic Canada, and they've had huge effort in order to get here, and they need to fatten up their reserves as much as possible for the return journey next year, going back to their breeding grounds. So while temporary displacement, or sometimes permanent if the geese then have to find new feeding sites, has a big impact. In terms of what people can do in their local areas, is some of actually, you know, the bits I was saying there, just in their gardens, but also if they're interested in, I'm talking to a lot of communities now about, you know, doing kind of mini wildlife corridors, where if people just plant 1 or 2 plants in their front or back garden for pollinators, that will have a big impact. So 1/3 of our wild bee population here is at risk of extinction.
Right.
So that's why the All Island Pollinator Plan was established. So what they could do is start looking at having plant swaps. So even if you get a packet of seeds, somebody propagates those seeds and then distributes that in the local community. That's something that would have a positive impact.
Fantastic, thanks, Lorraine. I mean, the dogs on leash, I mean, most dog owners are nature lovers anyway, they're animal lovers. So, you know, being aware of that would make a huge difference. So thanks for that. And yeah, All Island Pollinator Plan, a couple of plants in the garden would be your tip. And
not use chemicals, yes.
Definitely don't use chemicals, right, okay. So Hans, over to you. We are on mute, sorry.
The big pressure for us is the is it still off?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, okay. The big pressure for us is recreational pressure, and in particular, like people basically, like having their barbecues. That's like, and I suppose teenagers start a little bonfire that turns into an absolutely massive one. That is definitely the biggest problem that we have at the moment. If I could solve that, I would be delighted, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. So
yeah,
that's why I suppose we're kind of catering for it, that it will happen, and we're trying to adjust to that. But that would be really good. In terms of, like, say, I think fish pressure can be dealt with as long as sort of the pathway infrastructure that it provides is actually is adequate for it, as well signposted, because we kind of notice that most people will actually stay on the same pathways as well. And maybe just in terms of Eleanor's question as well, in our case, most of the people visiting Howth are actually tourists, and that was outside the 5K radius, so it was actually very quiet. I'd never seen it as quiet as that. While we were out there, I had the pathways for myself, so that was very nice.
Did that have any positive benefits?
Well, there was no pathway damage anyway, but there were still fires though, mind you, so that certainly didn't stop it anyway. I suppose in terms of what people can do for themselves, it's kind of going back to what Lorraine was already saying, in terms of what you can do in your garden itself, in terms of bird boxes, bed boxes, but also in terms of just planting as many flowers as you can to kind of get as much insect life in your garden, basically, and no garden chemicals, just kind of leave nature do its own thing, and they're really sort of the key things.
Fantastic. Yeah, we're used to having clinically managed gardens, and we're thankfully moving away from that. And there's a lot more interest in gardening for nature. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Hans. So Anne, best to last, obviously.
Well, I think the guys have covered probably a lot of the pressures. I would definitely say that the dogs for us, dogs off lead, and also dog poo.
Okay.
Yeah, and just, you know, it is that as well. I would ask people, probably, you know, we are a very urbanized environment, and we do need to leave space for biodiversity. Also, not only, you know, in our gardens, but take that out to the wider landscape. We do need to allocate areas for biodiversity that are left undisturbed. I think as humans, we feel we have to get in everywhere, but sometimes it's nice to actually leave areas for biodiversity that go undisturbed. And that would be lovely to see, that you can stand from a distance and admire and look at biodiversity without necessarily feeling that you need to, you know, be in on top of it. So the disturbance really would be a main factor for me in terms of biodiversity.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a slightly political question now, and a bit naughty, but obviously a biodiversity emergency was declared by Ireland and a lot of local authorities and other countries around the world. Are you seeing a response to an emergency in the way that we are going about our business and the resources needed to respond to that emergency?
Is that for me, Dean?
Yeah, go on. Sorry, Anne.
So I think people are really responding on the ground at a local level. Communities, individuals are communicating, are asking, what can we do? What can we do? And so some of that support has been put in place for communities to facilitate them, to help them via grants and advice. I think in general, I think across the board, both in business, in the public and private sector, across the board, at policy levels and at management level, I don't feel there's enough, I would say, resource and staffing of biodiversity related, ecological related jobs.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks very much. No, I get that as well, absolutely. Does anyone else there want to chip in?
Well, I'll go next then. In terms of the overall response, it will be far too slow and far too late. But if it will continue in this rate anyway, I suppose if you kind of look at the national stage, like the National Parks and Wildlife, is woefully underfunded and woefully understaffed as well. So, like, if I suppose if you're kind of looking at your European sites and the species that are associated with it, like most of those are still declining, it's going to require some remarkable turnaround in order to achieve like a good status again for many of those habitats and for many of those species as well. So I noticed actually recently the OPW brought out its biodiversity plan as well, and actually like that's full of really good proposed actions. I suppose the interesting thing is, will those things actually happen? I suppose like there's a lot of talk, but I would love to see whether these things actually ultimately translate into actually real action on the ground that will actually make a difference, whether it's in terms of farming or whether it's in terms of drainage works, whether it's in terms of forestry. Like there's a lot of, like, I suppose those sort of organizations have a huge like land take I suppose in Ireland, and I suppose like doing things in your garden is all well and good, and it certainly benefits some species, but the bulk of all the stuff that is declining is usually not in gardens and is elsewhere. And I suppose that's really, I suppose, where a lot more action is required, and relatively urgent as well. So far, I haven't seen much urgency in relation to it. I suppose that is just my, I suppose, the view I have here anyway. I do know internally anyway, like there's definitely much more interest in it. Our draining engineers, our roads engineers, our architects are all saying, listen, what do we need? What can we do? Well, like, what do you want us to do to kind of make this like a development better for wildlife and the likes of that? So that is a major change, I suppose. Like I've been in this job now about 20 years, and I've definitely seen a switch in terms of what people are actually wanting to do now for wildlife, and that definitely is very positive. But it's like, even like yesterday talking to the architects, for example, where they design things like green roofs and all these biodiversity friendly measures, but then the QS comes along for the government and takes all those things out because, well, it's not essential in development. So all these green measures get taken out again. And that's, I suppose, so I think certainly at central government, I still think we have a while to go.
Lorraine, did you want to come in with something there?
Well, just to echo both what Anne and also Hans have said there. So yeah, there doesn't seem to be the sense of a real emergency like that. I think there has been a lot of awareness, funny enough, actually during the COVID restrictions, because people were at home a lot more, and I think able to take the time and to have a look at nature. But I do worry that now we're all starting to open back up again, that a lot of that might get lost, and so we need to keep that momentum up, you know, and that's why I think things like this and getting the message out there are really important as well. But yeah, until kind of big business and development, and also as well, just to sometimes with CSR programs or sometimes even with climate action actions, they don't always align with biodiversity. So I think that's something as well that as biodiversity officers we need to promote a bit more.
And then it comes down to resourcing.
I hope there's going to be more biodiversity officers, because you know, we're one individual, you know, working in large areas. So
okay, I'm going to ask one more cheeky final question. Somebody checked down the back of the sofa and came up with a, I don't know, an amount of money, random £1 million or whatever, I don't know. What would you do with it? What would your, you know, if you had the funds, if you had the resources, what would your project be? Oh, I'm throwing it on you. I'm sorry about that.
Well, you want me to? Mine would be urban, because we're in an urban environment, but it probably actually applies to the countryside as well. I would try to buy some land for biodiversity, for semi-natural habitats and species, to allow them to, you know, to survive without disturbance, and have that as their havens.
Right, fantastic. Hans, you're
same here. Like in our case, I suppose, like, there's a couple of areas that we'll be focusing on, and like our estuaries will be the key one, basically, to actually restore the natural process there, to restore that natural landscape that was there. Now, your million doesn't go that far; it only buy 100 acres. But at the same time, it would be that's also what I would buy, indeed, to actually restore salt marshes, and I suppose the whole natural processes that have been destroyed now due to flood embankments. And like, I suppose we're actually looking at that now already in some of our estuaries, to see if we can actually purchase some of those lands to be able to restore, I suppose, what was there.
And they have great benefits to climate mitigation, don't they, some of these sites?
They do, because salt marsh, like I said, I actually was doing a presentation there last week in terms of salt marsh. Actually, I think it catches 20 times more carbon than a woodland would. So, like, if you think in terms of climate change action, it's actually much better to actually create tidal salt marshes. You'll actually capture a hell of a lot more than tree planting, basically. So it's, in my case, it's actually better value for money, because instead of, in our case, our county is, I suppose, largely made up of really good farmland, and instead of planting trees in good farmland and actually affecting food security in the future, we actually go to the place that are actually subject to flooding, and actually restore, like, really sort of carbon rich habitats there. So
that's very clever, joined up thinking, Hans. Lorraine, you got £1 million. What are you going to do?
If I'd have been lucky enough to win the 220 million that French person did, or person in France did, yeah, certainly habitat restoration, you know, including even, you know, wetlands, even within DCC, but you know, more sea bins, you know, to clean out plastic pollution, you know, from the bay, but also helping to build wildlife hospitals, you know, for a lot of injured wildlife. So yeah, a range of different measures, and fund more of these projects. Like one of the projects, actually, the Inner City Parks Bird Survey, is being done by the Irish Midland Ringing Group, and they've been doing great work. They're predominantly a team of volunteers that do a lot, you know, great work. So if you think of, if you had £1 million to give to that type of project, the amount of good work that you could do. So
yeah. Fantastic, guys. We are out of time, and as always, this has been a brilliant webinar, and that's thanks to Lorraine, Anne and Hans for your wonderful presentations, your continuing work to help protect our natural heritage. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.